Hi, and welcome to English-Fabule. Are you learning English? Great. Let's learn English with a very interesting story. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment. Let's get started.
Imagine standing in the vast Sahara Desert. Here, a border stretches for hundreds of kilometers, perfectly straight. It divides two countries, Algeria and Niger. In this very remote place, there are no natural features like rivers or mountains to mark the line. There are no towns or even small villages nearby. This perfectly straight line is a strong example of how Africa's map was made. The people who drew this line were not in the desert. They were thousands of kilometers away, in meeting rooms in Europe. They used maps and pencils to decide where countries would begin and end. If you look at a map of Africa, you will notice many borders like this one. Some are very straight, like a ruler was used. Others have very strange shapes. Think about the Gambia, for instance. It is a small country shaped like a long, thin snake, stretching inland from the Atlantic coast. It is almost completely surrounded by the country of Senegal. This means that many people in the Gambia live very close to the border, often just a few kilometers away. Their daily lives can be complicated because of this unusual border. This brings us to a very important question. Why do Africa's borders often look so unnatural? Why do they not follow the natural land, like big rivers or mountain ranges? Why do they cut across land where the same groups of people have lived for many hundreds of years, sometimes dividing families or communities? The simple truth is that these lines were not drawn by Africans. They were created by powerful Europeans in faraway cities such as Berlin, Paris, and London. These European leaders and officials decided the map of Africa without asking the people who lived on the continent. These decisions, made in quiet rooms, changed the lives of hundreds of millions of Africans for many generations. This book will tell the story of these unusual borders. It will explain how the current map of Africa was made. We will also learn about the many big problems and challenges these borders created. This is a story about how old lines from long ago still have a very real impact on Africa today, shaping countries and affecting the lives of its people. 2. Africa before the lines. Before Europeans drew lines on maps, Africa was not an empty place. Many European maps from the 1800s showed large white spaces marked unknown or unexplored. This made it seem like Africa had no people or no organized governments. But this was a wrong idea, a myth created by colonial powers. The truth was very different. When Europeans arrived, Africa was full of life and highly organized societies. People had developed many different ways to live and govern themselves over hundreds of years. These ranged from very large, powerful kingdoms that covered vast areas to smaller, decentralized groups with complex systems of shared leadership. People managed their land, resolved disagreements, and traded across long distances. African people thought about land and borders in a way that was different from Europeans. They had fluid frontiers instead of hard, fixed borders. Frontiers were not strict lines. They were like zones where different groups might meet, trade, or move at different times of the year. Power could spread out or come together, depending on leaders and loyalty. This was a smart way to live, fitting the land and the economy of the time. But European hard borders would later disrupt these old, flexible systems. One great example of an organized society was the Sokoto Caliphate. At its peak in the mid-1800s, it was a large Islamic state in West Africa. It covered parts of what are now Nigeria, Niger, Cameroon, and Burkina Faso. The caliphate had a very complex system of rule, like a federal state. The main leader, the Sultan, managed many smaller areas called emirates. Each emirate had its own ruler, but they all answered to the Sultan. The caliphate had laws, a tax system, and many schools. Another example was the Igbo societies in southeastern Nigeria. These societies did not have one king or a single ruler at the top, which Europeans often misunderstood. Instead, authority was shared among different groups. Decisions were made by councils of family heads, age groups, and other community leaders. This made their system very fair and open to many voices. Leadership was earned through ability and service, not just by being born into a certain family. Across the continent, there were many other complex kingdoms and peoples. The kingdom of Buganda, in what is now Uganda, had a king and a type of parliament that could limit royal power. The Akan states in Ghana developed systems where queen mothers also had important political roles. Even in the vast Sahara, Tuareg groups were highly organized, controlling trade routes and having their own laws. So Africa was not a continent of simple, isolated groups. It was a dynamic land with many different, connected peoples and states. They had rich cultures, long histories, and sophisticated ways of living together. The lines drawn by Europeans completely ignored all of this existing complexity and interconnectedness. 3. The Big Meeting in Berlin. In the late 1800s, Europe looked to Africa with new interest. This period is known as the Scramble for Africa. Several powerful reasons led to this quick rush for control over the continent. European factories were growing fast and needed more raw materials. They wanted things like palm oil to lubricate their machines and ivory for different products. Also, these factories made many goods, and Europe needed new places or markets to sell them. This drive for resources and markets was a big economic reason for the scramble. Beyond money, European nations also wanted more power and importance in the world. After the Franco-Prussian War, France wanted to show its strength again. Germany, newly unified, also sought colonies to prove its power. Even Britain, already a strong trading nation, felt pressure to join the race. Owning colonies in Africa made a country seem more important on the world stage. Some Europeans also believed they had a duty to bring Christianity and their way of life to Africa, which they called a civilizing mission. This idea helped gain public support for the expensive plans. The fast rush for land could easily have caused wars among the European powers. To avoid this, a big meeting was called in Berlin, Germany. It began in November 1884 and ended in February 1885. 14 nations were present, including the major European powers and the United States. It is important to remember that no African leaders or representatives were invited, even though the meeting was entirely about their continent's future. Contrary to common belief, the Berlin Conference did not draw the exact borders of Africa's countries directly on a map. Instead, its main purpose was to set up rules for how European nations could claim land in Africa without fighting each other. The most important rule was called effective occupation. This meant a country could not just say it owned a piece of land in Africa. It had to show that it had real control over the area. This meant sending its own people to set up offices, sending soldiers to show power, or making agreements with local African rulers. This rule made the scramble even more intense and fast. European nations quickly sent explorers and officials across Africa. They wanted to claim as much land as they could before another country got there first. Many treaties were signed with African rulers, but these rulers often did not fully understand the European ideas of ownership. They did not know that signing these papers would mean giving away their land or power forever. So, in the years after the Berlin meeting, the actual borders were drawn on maps. These lines were often created quickly, sometimes based on poor maps or little knowledge of the land and its people. This process resulted in many straight lines in empty deserts and the division of many large groups of people across new borders. This meeting truly shaped the map of Africa as we know it today. 4. A line divides people. The new borders created by Europeans had a great human cost. They did not care about the people living on the land. Instead, lines were drawn on maps in faraway offices. These lines broke up communities and forced different groups of people together into new countries. One sad example is the Somali people. Before the borders, they were one large group with the same language, religion, and culture. They lived and moved across a wide area. But European powers split the Somali homeland into 5 different parts. These parts became British Somalia, Italian Somalia, French Somaliland, now Djibouti, and 2 areas given to Ethiopia and British Kenya. This meant that Somali families found themselves living in different countries, separated by borders they did not choose. Their old travel routes for animals were blocked. This division caused many problems for them for a long time. Another example is the ancient Congo Kingdom. This was a strong kingdom that existed for many centuries. It covered a large area. But the new borders cut this old kingdom into 3 pieces. One part went to Portuguese Angola, another part went to French control, the third part became part of what was then called King Leopold's Congo Free State. This split the Bakongo people, who had shared a common history and way of life. Their traditional leaders lost power, and their old ways of trading were broken. While some groups were split apart, others were forced to live together. Nigeria is a clear example of this. The British created Nigeria in 1914. They joined two big areas, the North and the South, into one country. Inside this new country were over 250 different groups of people. They spoke more than 500 different languages. These groups had very different cultures, religions, and ways of life. The British did this for their own reasons, mainly to manage money better. They did not think about how these different groups would live together. This led to big problems, and even a long civil war after Nigeria became independent. These borders were drawn far away, ignoring the real lives and history of African people. The lines did not follow where communities lived or where old kingdoms were. They caused lasting problems for families and created new countries with many different people who did not always agree. This made it very hard for the new African nations to become strong and united after independence. The effects of these lines are still felt today. 5. Hard times for new countries. The new lines drawn on the map by European powers caused big problems for African countries. These borders created many difficulties, especially for their economies. One major issue was that many new countries did not have access to the sea. This meant their economies struggled from the very start. In fact, after colonial times, 16 countries in Africa became landlocked. This means they were completely surrounded by other countries, with no coast to the ocean. For thousands of years, having access to the sea was very important for trade. Ships brought goods in and out, helping economies grow. But now, these new landlocked countries faced much higher costs for trade and transport. They had to rely on roads or railways through other countries to get their goods to port. This made their exports less competitive in the world market and made imports more expensive for their people. These extra costs slowed down their economic growth and made life harder for many. A very strange example of these borders is the Gambia. It is a small country, very long and thin, almost completely inside another country, Senegal. Only a small part of the Gambia touches the Atlantic Ocean. Because of this, for people in Senegal, traveling from one part of their own country to another can be very difficult. To go from Senegal's capital, Dakar, to its southern area, people often have to pass through the Gambia. This means crossing an international border, which can cause long delays and extra costs for goods and people. This strange border makes daily life and trade hard for both countries, showing how artificial lines can hurt local economies. These artificial borders also led to a lot of trouble and fighting. They often put different groups of people who had no history of living together into one country. This made it hard for these new countries to get along with each other. Or they split apart people who were part of the same group, like the Somali people who were divided across 5 territories. This caused many disagreements and often led to violence. For example, in Nigeria, many different groups were forced together into one nation. This situation often led to civil wars, where people within the same country fought each other for control or for their own identity. These conflicts were a sad and direct result of the borders drawn by people far away, without knowing or caring about the lives and communities of Africans. These divisions continue to cause problems even today. 6. Keeping the old borders. After gaining independence, new African leaders faced a very big choice. The map of Africa had lines drawn by Europeans, and these lines often split up people who were alike, or put different groups into one country. Many leaders thought these borders were unfair and should change. For example, the Somali people were divided into 5 different parts. This meant families were separated and ancient travel routes were cut off. Many thought Africa should be redrawn to fix these problems and make countries more natural, based on shared language or culture. However, changing the borders was a very difficult idea. Africa has thousands of different groups, and almost every country contained many of them. If leaders tried to make new borders for each group, it could lead to many wars and much violence. They remembered what happened in India in 1947, where changing borders caused a lot of fighting and millions of people had to leave their homes. The new African countries were also quite poor and did not have enough resources to manage such a huge and complex task. There was no agreement on how to even start redrawing borders, as different leaders had different ideas. In July 1964, leaders met in Cairo for a very important meeting. This was the first big summit of the Organization of African Unity, or OAU. They talked a lot about the borders. Leaders like Prime Minister Abubakar Tafawa Balewa from Nigeria and Emperor Haile Selassie from Ethiopia warned against changing the map. They said it would open a Pandora's box, meaning it would create countless new problems and conflicts across the continent. They believed it was better to keep things as they were to stop more wars between countries. The world outside also preferred stable nations. So the OAU decided something very important. They agreed to respect the borders that had been left by the colonial powers. This decision was called the Cairo Resolution. It meant that even if the borders seemed wrong or unfair, they would stay the same. This choice was practical and helped keep peace between the new nations. It stopped many possible wars over land and territory. But it also left big problems. Different ethnic groups, who sometimes had nothing in common and even had long histories of conflict, were forced to live together within the same borders. This often led to disagreements, fighting, and internal conflicts for many years. The decision kept peace between countries, but created serious challenges for peace and unity within them. 7. Working together now. Africa is now working to make the old borders less important. These borders were made a long time ago by people from Europe. Today, African countries are finding new ways to connect and cooperate. They want to make life easier for their people. Many regional groups have started across the continent. One important group is ECOWAS, which stands for the Economic Community of West African States. Another is the East African Community. These groups help people and goods move more freely. For example, in ECOWAS, people from member countries can travel, live, and work in other member countries without a visa. This means a trader from Mali can sell goods in Nigeria more easily. It also means students can study in a different country in the region. Because of these groups, it is simpler to travel across borders. It is also easier to trade. Before, these borders caused many problems for people. They separated families and made it hard to do business. Now, these groups are slowly fixing those problems. Technology also helps connect people. Mobile phones and the internet do not care about borders. People can talk to family and friends in other countries. They can share ideas and do business online. This makes people feel closer, even if they live in different countries. There is also a big plan for the whole continent. It is called the African Continental Free Trade Area. This plan wants to create one large market for goods and services across all of Africa. This means countries can trade with each other without paying many taxes at the borders. This will make businesses grow and help more people earn money. It will also bring back some of the old trade routes that existed before the Europeans drew the lines on the map. Africa is showing that it can work together. The borders are still there, but their power is becoming weaker. Africans are building a future where unity is more important than the lines from the past. 8. The future of Africa. The story of Africa's borders started a long time ago. European powers drew straight lines on maps far away from Africa. These lines created countries without thinking about the people already living there. Many communities were split, and different groups were forced together. This caused many problems, from economic hardship to conflicts. But Africa is now looking to its future, and the power of these old lines is changing. Today, African countries are working to make these borders less important. They are doing this through something called regional integration. For example, the Economic Community of West African States, or ECOWAS, lets people travel, live, and work in member countries without a visa. This makes it easier for people to cross borders for trade or to visit family. The East African country is doing similar things, even working towards a single currency for its members. These efforts help to bring people closer, just like before the colonial lines were drawn. A new generation of Africans is leading this change. They use modern technology every day. Mobile phones and the internet connect people across countries. Young Africans are growing up seeing the continent as one place. They understand that the old lines should not stop them from working together or building a better future. They want a united and strong Africa. Africa is slowly healing from the divisions of the past. The problems caused by the unnatural borders are still there, but people are finding ways to live beyond them. African leaders are not trying to erase the borders. Instead, they are finding ways to work around them. They are making new paths for trade, education, and security that cross the old lines easily. The African Continental Free Trade Area, called AfCFT, is a big plan. It aims to create one large market for all of Africa. This will help trade grow across the continent, bringing back old trade routes but in a new way. It will also help African countries depend less on faraway markets. Africa is shaping its own future. The continent is moving past the time when outsiders decided its path. It is stepping out from under the ruler. It is making its own choices and building a future based on African ideas and needs. What do you think is the most important thing Africa needs to do to build its future?
Hey there! Just a second before you go. If you learned something new today, please give this video a like, write your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel. It only takes a second, and it really, really helps to create even better English videos for you. Your support means the world. Thank you.